So good afternoon. All right. Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, wherever you are. Welcome to the third webinar of the Observatory on India of the Center for Foreign Policy Studies. Today, we will discuss and talk about the macroeconomic policy and India's structural transformation. And the main presentation will be given by Partha Sen, who is a member of our steering committee, of the Observatory. And he has taught for many years at the at the Delhi School of Economics in Delhi. But he has been visiting many universities, including University of Illinois, the London School of Economics, Bristol, and many others. And is also quite known in Italy. He has been also visiting the University of Tor Vergata. University of Tor Vergata, where it was the place of teaching of the discussant, who is Pasquale Lucio Scandizzo, and he has a long experience in international economics and social evaluation. He has worked in several international organizations, including the World Bank, the FAO, the IDB, and so on. As I said, he teaches the University of Tor Vergata, is president of Open Economics International, and I like to mention he has been also president of the Institute for Economic Research, the Italian Institute of Economic Research, where I had the pleasure and the honor to know him. He was my first president, by the way. So, with not wasting time, I will give the floor to Partha Sen, who will present his ideas. He has 20 minutes to make this presentation, and then Lucio will follow with his discussion, and we have an open discussion. Please use the chat box of Zoom to post your questions and suggestions so we can pick them up and forward to the two speakers, so we have a lively discussion. Please, Partha, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Sergio. It is a pleasure to be here and among such distinguished other panelists. So let's see. My ideas are a little speculative, so I would welcome any feedback from the audience and, of course, from the discussant. So my starting point is that, macroeconomic policy, is it different between a developed country and a developing country? And in some sense, if you know the macroeconomics of a European country, with some hope, you can apply it to the United States. But is it true that if you have a hang of what's happening in the United States, can you then discuss macroeconomics in India? So, it's the old thing about Tolstoy saying that all happy families are the same, and all unhappy families are unhappy in their own ways. So developing countries have different features. So we cannot lift an entire apparatus of macroeconomic policy from developed countries. Okay. Next, please, Daniel. Here I just want to emphasize the fact that, everyone in this audience probably knows all this, that, in developed countries, in Europe, in the US, in Australia, two things are what define macroeconomic policy. One is that there is some inflation targeting, and the other one is that your budget balance should not be just way out of line with, it should be balanced. Now, I emphasize here that developing countries have other constraints. One particular constraint is a foreign exchange constraint. So, developing economies usually need to find dollars, euros, whatever are international currencies. So, often people say that they have two budget constraints. One is income expenditure in any currency, and the other one is income expenditure in foreign currency, in tradable currencies, international currencies. Next, please, Daniel. My starting point is to say that this macroeconomic policy framework that we are talking about has no role for developing economies. In particular, here I will talk about moving labor from agriculture to industry. Okay, and I will talk about this Dutch disease. It's premature here, but I will come back to this later on, that if you don't get your policies right, you can actually contribute to, not only not moving labor from agriculture to industry, but to actually retard the process. And then the other factor that I will emphasize today is that this emphasis on a budget balance in fiscal policy has no features of investing in human capital, primary education, public health. So, it is very clear that a developing economy like India, which is, I will come back to this, it also has very rich segments. So it has a lot of hospitals, and there is medical tourism. People come from Africa, from West Africa, to be treated here. So at some end, it is cutting edge. But I'm talking about the poor who have no education, who have no access to health. What the they are being left behind because there is except for state intervention, there is nothing that can be done. They don't have the money, they don't have the wherewithal to go and get this education. There are no markets. They cannot pay. So it is very important to remember that. And I just emphasize that that of late the government has been emphasizing private expenditure or insurance, the central government in India. So it's very market oriented. It is not tackling, in my opinion, the core problem. Now, just one line here, that India used to have a so-called planned economy. Not, the planning was not done properly, but at least there was a recognition that there was something more than 1 year budget at a time. So there were 5-year plans. So you were looking at something explicitly for 5 years. There was a perspective plan, which was a 25-year. It was not done properly. So I'm not here, trying to defend India's planning experience, but I'm saying that at least the thought was correct. Okay, next, please. So here I will try and do two things. I have written it out as three. So let me. So that developing economies need external balance. So it's different from your OECD countries in that it has the need to try and balance its external payments. So because its currency is not accepted in the world, or at least limited acceptance in India's case. The second point I will make is that capital inflows can create problems, and it can actually hamper structural transformation. So what is structural transformation? Structural transformation is moving labor out of unproductive activities, and agriculture in India's case, to more productive activities, so services or industry. So I'll come back to this. But when I was growing up, this used to be referred to as economic development, but now it's called structural transformation. So, and then macroeconomic over time requires both demand, that, whatever you produce, industry or services, there has to be sufficient demand for it, but also supply. If your health is very, if the health parameters of the population are very poor, education is very poor, then you have a problem. And I will come back to this. Next, please. So just some statistics quickly. 43% of India's labor force is in agriculture. It produces 16% of GDP. So, there is a problem here. That in industry is sort of 26%, which produces 25% of GDP. But I just emphasize that some deindustrialization has been taking place here. Instead of it going the other way, and steadily the percent of GDP produced in industry is falling. Now, we need to move labor from agriculture. The question is to where? Raghuram Rajan, the former governor of the central bank, former chief economist at the IMF, has emphasized that we should not get into industry, low returns from industry. We should get into services, which is where Indians are good at. So I'll show that, this is not quite right. Now, it is not that no one has been thinking of industry. So the Indian government has been trying of late to have production-linked incentives to industry, PLI. And so there are two candidates here, PLI and Raghuram Rajan, and I will have reason to say that we need to think a little more than that. So structural transformation is constrained by demand and supply. And okay, next, please. So this is an old debate in India. The question is, we have moved from an inward-looking industrialization of the 50s and the 60s to an outward orientation. Now, what is outward orientation? You open a current account, as in East Asia, which is a spectacular success, China being the latest one, or open a current account and capital account, as in Latin America, which, if you look at Argentina's experience from being the top 10 economies in the interwar period, is now floundering. So, but India has chosen to go the Latin American way. Next, please. So, I am making a pitch for labor-intensive industries, crude this thing. Why? Because India is a bimodal economy. It has people who are doing very well in the world, best engineers, best computer people. And on the other hand, there are people who just can't read. Look at the adult literacy rate, which is 75%. In the case of women, it's even worse. And Bangladesh, which has joined the race very late, is almost the same as India. And look at Vietnam, which is a potential competitor, is almost 100%, 95, 96%. So India's just adult literacy, I'm not talking about quality. So quality can be emphasized later. Public spending on health is very poor, 1.24% of GDP. Okay. And this is, the central government is only 0.2% of GDP, and the provinces, the states, are provide the rest. So it's really very, very little. Now, and as I said earlier, that the central government has been emphasizing health insurance. It has more than doubled. Next, please. So, these are some figures in PPP dollar terms. India's public expenditure per capita is $25, Vietnam is 74, and South Africa, which is supposed to be a failed industrialization state, is 352. So, it's really spending money on health. And children's health parameters are very poor. I want to just spend 1 minute on this. Infant mortality, India has tried to tackle infant mortality. So India's infant mortality rate is fine because that's very visible to everyone. But what is not visible is stunting, and that is height for age. So stunting, which is a long-term thing, you can't change stunting very quickly because height takes time. So stunting is very bad, and wasting, which is the weight for height. So that can be changed very quickly. But both these parameters are very bad. And compared to sub-Saharan Africa, India it does quite badly compared to sub-Saharan Africa. So infant mortality is fine, but stunting and wasting, which gives you an indication of the future labor productivity, is very bad. Next, please. So what are these production-linked incentive schemes? 14 sectors were chosen. I'll quickly go through this. The slides are there. And so 2 lakh crores, a lakh is 100,000. Okay, so 2 lakh crores is, you have to think of the lakh as 100,000. So have been spent, and the performance has been very patchy. Okay, so it's not very clear if you look at this, what is it that PLI's schemes are for. PLI schemes are for mobile phones. You get mobile phone production out of China. So there's a security concern there, and it's cutting edge. That's fine. How much value is being added? Not very sure. But textile, very few jobs have been created. 12,600 is really, it's even my neighborhood has more people. And there is also, artificial material for textile. There is cronyism. So we can talk about this if there are questions later on. So you see all kinds of things are there: mobile phones, pharmaceuticals, and advanced chemistry cells, etc. So, but cronyism is important. We'll come back to that. Okay, next, please. So textile export declined for the second consecutive year in the last year. It's true for leather and footwear. Apparel and textile exports are 35 billion, which is not very good. So, these are the sort of labor-intensive industries which don't require too much education, and we are not doing that well here. Next, please. So my proposal is that we should have labor-intensive industry for those without skills. We can do some import substitution, so produce for the domestic markets, but mainly it has come from outside. And it has to be demand from the world market. So we need real exchange rate adjustment and major investment in health and education. So some industry and services at the upper end. So I'm not ruling out what Raghuram Rajan is saying, but I'm saying that is not enough. And of course, if we are going to produce intermediate products, then it has to be dovetailed with international production chains. Next, please. So these are, I've already talked about this. So next, please. So So it's basically, the analysis, the framework of analysis is very much post-Milton Friedman, that we should let the market do its job. So the government should not interfere. The government should not create noise. My question in this framework is, where is the exchange rate? If we are going to target the foreign and external markets, where is the exchange rate? Next, please. Open capital accounts have inflows and outflows, both of them. The Reserve Bank of India, the central bank, has to take a stand, and it has to intervene. So in the literature, it's called exchange market pressure. Inflows can either be met through a currency appreciation or by building foreign exchange reserves. Outflows, as India has been seeing recently, in the last year or so, that either you let the currency depreciate or you let foreign exchange reserves go down. We don't have a framework for this. So I'm saying that is the RBI clueless or dishonest? I'm not sure. Okay. And we are headed for a macroeconomic crisis. So it's not very clear what the Reserve Bank of India is doing. They keep on emphasizing the fact that we are trying to iron out volatility, but this is a secular decline. Next, please. So capital inflows cause real appreciation, and it causes a Dutch disease. Okay, so basically what it does is inflows cause the rupee, the Indian currency, to appreciate against foreign currencies, and therefore it makes the traded goods sector in India less competitive. That's the Dutch disease. Okay, and so India has been beset by this. If you want, I wrote a piece in Project Syndicate last month on with some figures on the Dutch disease. Okay, next, please. So I'm advocating an outward-looking exchange rate and industrial policy. The analysis has been short-run, demand-driven, but I also want to emphasize poor health and education parameters will constrain growth and structural transformation. So there is demand deficiency, but that's not the only problem. There's also supply problems from poor education and health. Next, please. So why is India unable to move labor to more productive sectors? That's my question. There's Dutch disease because the currency has appreciated, real appreciation. Simultaneously, there is lack of health education. So what I'm proposing, can my proposals work? The answer is, in the current situation, we have to worry about that. So it's the proposals are there. They can be fine-tuned to the existing situation, but right now I'm not very optimistic. Thank you, Sergio.
Thank you, Partha. That was very, very perfect on time. Clear messages, but clearly from a deep analysis, a long work carried out over many years. So thank you very much. But I'm sure there are questions. And so I again invite the participants to post their questions in the Q&A. I see there are already 2 of them. Please continue. And now we turn to Lucio Scandizzo for his discussion of your presentation. Lucio, the floor is yours. Please, if you can keep in 10 minutes, that would be great. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Sergio. Many thanks, Partha. I really enjoyed your presentation, which makes very clear that India, on one hand, India stands at a crucial juncture where its economic policy decision will shape its global standing for years to come. On the other hand, it can also be seen a sort of a dramatic, paradigmatic case that synthesizes, and encompasses to some extent most of the problems faced by developing countries, and also from several developed ones. So I will try to discuss these trade-offs also by taking off from your presentation, Pata, but focusing on the key question that I think remains, which is whether India can successfully navigate these dramatic trade-offs through adaptive policies, or are bold decisions or decisive choices inevitable? So India's economic trajectory is shaped by competing priorities. As a rapidly growing economy, India must balance industrial expansion, and we've seen financial stability, employment generation, environmental sustainability, and global competitiveness. This is a familiar set of choices for everybody, but as I said before, it seems to me that also from Partha's presentation, it emerges as a particularly hard and dramatic in the case of India. And the central question is whether these trade-offs can be managed dynamically through gradual adjustments, or whether the country must make some hard, bold upfront decisions to establish a clear economic direction, and to some extent let, or we can say, endogenize most of the results rather than trying to produce them directly. So one of the first one, I think, is the first question, which is a very general trade-off which all faces: growth versus sustainability. And which means that one of the essentially most pressing dilemma is between economic growth and the environment. I mean, the environmental sustainability, but in broad sense, I mean, including also the One Health paradigm. I mean, the question of the health of the environment and of the people. I mean, of the animals. I mean, of nature in some extent. And industrial expansion, infrastructure projects, and urbanizations, I mean, are all important GDP growth drivers, but they often lead to environmental degradation, especially for countries like India that they have to develop at a very high and rapid rate, but and don't have the instruments to mitigate the environmental effects, the environmental damages. Then there is the trade-off between fiscal prudence and social welfare. This is a very familiar trade-off, that, is the trade-off which is of the greatest significance for Europe, for example. But of course, for India, we can see also that is extremely important as dramatic. Strict fiscal discipline probably is not to be recommended, but because it may result in a catastrophic consequences socially. But also the problem is that it's the sustainability of that is, of course, a major question, both at the India level and at the world level, because of the reflections, the spillovers of the rest of the world, of a country as large as India are really momentous. Then there is this very specific problem of the trade-off between technological progress and employment, which is somewhat peculiar because India has made great advances in automation, digital transformation, and AI, especially, I guess, on the service side rather than on the manufacturing side. Programs such as Skill India, which aim to upskill workers, have been somewhat successful. although there is a lot of controversy about those. But the question remains whether India should aggressively push for automation-driven efficiency at potential cost of job losses, with most of its workforce, basically confined to low-skill jobs, at least in the short run, or should focus on labor-intensive industry to maximize employment opportunities. Now, India is only, I think, 4% of total labor-intensive industry, manufacturing industry, world share. I mean, while China has more than 45%. I mean, so it's really a staggering difference. Nevertheless, the question is, to what extent should the aim of India in the next 30 years be confined only to expand into the labor-intensive manufacturing, which is, of course, a low value-added, the lowest value-added part of the international value chain. Then we have the global competitiveness versus domestic protection problem. I mean, this is a problem. This is the Trump era, so it's the era of the dramatization of this problem, which is a major effect of the global imbalances, which we really don't know how to govern, and also the intersection or the relationship between the trade account and the capital account, two beasts which seem to, in theory, they should be consistent with each other, but they're not. I mean, they are sort of in a circular relationship, which is very difficult to govern and even to understand in its implications. So the question of protectionist policies, or whether to integrate fully into global markets, the next India or the next phase of development is one major trade-off. Then there is the trade-off between urbanization and rural development, which is also particularly dramatic in the case of India. And I'm not going to expand on this because it really in itself is a universe of problems, but the trade-off is between prioritizing urban growth as the engine of economic development or ensuring that rural areas receive equitable resources and development opportunities. This is a different, although similar, problem of the trade-off between stabilization policy or consolidation policies and welfare, but it has, geoeconomic equilibrium problems. Then we have the outward-oriented versus the choice between the trade-off between the outward-oriented and the inward-oriented strategy. We are moving towards a multipolar world, an increasing multipolar world, and clearly India has all the cards to be one of the poles, at least to be the leader in one of the poles. As a consequence, the choice of inward-looking versus import substitution is not only a consequence for India, but it's a consequence for the multipolar world, for the orientation of the value chains, and also the question of the exchange rate that Partha, emphasized so appropriately, I think enters into these questions, into this equation. I mean, should we have a managed exchange rate, or that may insulate India from external shock, but could reduce efficiency and limit economic dynamism, or should we point more to an outward-oriented, as I said, where choice, where exchange rates moves in the right direction, but as an endogenous consequence of all the rest of the policies. And the final question is, which is the most encompassing one, is can trade-offs be managed, or must radical choices be made? So this is well, this is a question that first emerged with the Keynesian economics, with the idea of fine-tuning. I mean, when we try to fine-tune, that means that we are trying to manage the trade-offs. And to some extent, perhaps that's possible. But, one of the things that we have learned in the past 50 years is that trade-offs perhaps can be managed, but they cannot be fine-tuned. And so radical choices sometimes have to be made. And then within this radical choice, we can do some management, but we cannot escape from the need of a radical choice, which does not mean that we cannot use a graduate approach to some extent, but some radical upfront choices, for example, committing to an export-led strategy or implementing strict capital controls, could provide clarity and stability, even though they limit flexibility. On the other hand, also a radical choice may be total flexibility. The question is that, I had the impression that these are hierarchical questions. Some radical upfront choices are inevitable if one wants to have a long-term strategy. Then otherwise the managing the trade-offs, it is an illusion that tends to decay into an impossible, fine-tuning approach. So a strategy should be characterized by few bold choices, and then given these few bold choices, this could be this could design the scenario within which it should be managed. Management is possible. So I conclude by saying that I like Partha's proposal, but I am afraid, at the same time, I'm afraid that it doesn't go far enough in terms of the both, these bold choices that are necessary and how effectively India may navigate these trade-offs. So a pragmatic approach is needed that balance external competitiveness, social equity, and fiscal sustainability, and that's what basically Partha was presented. And this may offer the best path forward, but I think that policymakers must also recognize that delaying the difficult decision is demandable because it could result in stagnation, and at the same time, radical shifts could destabilize growth. So ultimately, the point is to craft policies. I think that rather than try to navigate the trade-offs ex ante, make the sum of these key choices among competing objectives, few ones, I guess few straight-line strategy, but try to maintain flexibility, adaptability, and long-term resilience by managing appropriately in a policy, in a democratic policy framework. Hopefully, these choices.
Thank you, Pasquale. That's as you raised many important questions, and we have already 4 questions. But before going to, and the questions are really challenging. But before, I would like to ask Partha if in 1 minute you want to say something now, or on what Lucio said, or you prefer to wait for the discussion?
No, just quickly,
Yes.
Thank you very much, Lucio, because I think you've raised a lot of issues, some of which I had thought of, and so I like a lot of economists. I'm a little schizophrenic, so sometimes I do environmental issues and climate change, and then but it does worry me that labor-intensive industrialization, when the starting point of India's air quality and water quality is so bad, what it will do to the environment. That's one thing. The second thing is that, India is making long-term changes in the climate change context of, it is not giving up coal-fired power plants. It is also going into a very American-style transportation, highways and things like that. not and aeroplanes for short distances. So it's not getting into railways, although that could be done. So that's one thing that needs to be borne in mind. The second thing is that I have emphasized some rich people, and the bulk of the masses are poor. But like Italy, there's a north-south divide also. Okay, the southern states are very rich, and there's one line, and the exporting states are very rich, and the hinterland. So their population growth has trickled to basically replacement rates or even less than replacement rates. But there is the hinterland, which is called the Hindi heartland, where the poverty is abysmal, but migration is taking place. So the people are, and they are uneducated people. Okay, so there are all those issues, but I can come back to some of the other issues later.
Okay, so let's move to the questions. You can all see them in Q&A, but I want resume a little bit. So the first one is from Elisabetta Basile, who is member of the steering committee of the Observatory and is also an honorable professor of economics. So she agrees with several things that Parth said, but at the end, she asked, she thinks that it's important to explore the reasons behind the choices done in the past that have had the impact on health, education, and so on. And in particular, she asked in this regard, she would like to know whether you Parth agrees with Atul Kohli's analysis in Poverty Amid Plenty, which links education and health policies to the strong pro-business bias of India governments. Starting with Indira Gandhi, I guess.
Yeah, no, but if you think of the engineering schools that the state set up, or the medical schools that the state set up, some of them are really very good. I mean, the Indian institutes of technology are as good as any in the world. Maybe not in research, but certainly in terms of their pedagogic ability. Now, what happened? Why did industrialization not take place? Why did medical services not trickle down? So I think of late, I would agree with Atul Kohli that and the state has moved away from investing in higher education, etc. And it has a pro-business bias. And now in recent years, the pro-business bias is taking the form of go and do your undergraduate anywhere in the world, undergraduate degree. So that's foreign exchange reserves accumulated through intervention. But you think that those foreign exchange reserves belong to you, and you give it to those people who can afford to buy it. And that's sort of a very the elite in India. So I think it's more than just pro business. I think it is also the bureaucracies involved, the urban populations involved. And one point I wanted to make in the context of this, Lucio's, is thing that, when I have been talking about limiting capital flows for 20 years, and of course, like everything that I've been saying, no one listens to me. But it is true that 20 years ago, there was still some hope of being able to limit capital flows if the authorities wanted to. Okay, to limit the Dutch disease. Today, people have benefited from property prices rising, from share prices rising, from ability to buy foreign exchange to send their children to inferior schools in Europe. Then there'll be a huge outcry if you try to come down. So the broad gist of Atul Kohli is right, and the details may be a little different.
No, thank you, Partha. I was muted. Sorry. Lucio, do you want to say anything on this, or you can go to the second question?
No, I just want to say that we have a similar problem of in Italy between the north and the south, but I don't know. I mean, in the sense that there is very different level of development. But the question is that the south, I mean, our agricultural sector is much smaller, and the difference between the south and the north are basically in the being wiped out by out migration and the population of the south, which is very sad in a sense. And we hope we can reverse that, but I don't think that India, should look at something similar. So it's a really big question, and also the income distribution and what I said before, the welfare stabilization trade-off.
Yeah, thank you. Yes, the second question is from Mario Pezzini, used to be the director of DEC at the OECD. Now it's a consultant for the FAO. Well, Mario, sorry for that. I'm not precise, but the question is very important as it comes back to the issue of where move people from agriculture to where. And this suggests, shouldn't we use a different unit of analysis than macro sectors, a more granular territorial-based planning, addressing specific value chains? So who wants to start replying to this challenging question?
Yeah, so, I fully agree that, India is too big for one size fit all. So I am trying to say one size fit all because macroeconomic policy has to be one size fit all. Now, it is absolutely, when people say that you might get stuck in low productive industry, the fact is that we used to have a lot of low productivity industries which have now gone to China. Okay, I mean, if you know, there's this Indian god Ganesh with the elephant god with an elephant trunk. So he is worshipped at a certain point in the year, and suddenly all the elephant gods have been produced in China. Now, it just cannot be. I mean, air conditioners I can understand, bicycles I can understand, but Ganeshas are very heavy. So, I mean, the transport costs are significant. So there is a lot of scope for poor import substitution as a transition mechanism. Okay. So, but I fully agree that, it's as we agree, as I've emphasized, that there are many Indias in terms of income distribution and geographic locations, and of course, in terms of education. So therefore, the Prime Minister is very fond of saying that, his province, and there is no diamond there, but sort of every other diamond jewelry passes through the hands of his Gujarati compatriots. So, there are different things, and a slightly more granular approach will have to be done. There is no doubt about that. I'm doing a broad brush impressionism here.
Thank you, Partha. Lucio?
See, I think the development of agriculture and this question of granularity is very important. It makes a very good point. See, the problem is that we cannot afford to reduce agricultural production everywhere, or perhaps anywhere at some extent, because population is growing, and of course, food. The problem of food supply, but not only food supply. I mean, essentially also key intermediate inputs for the manufacturing industries and for the services will become greater, not smaller. So, but we should try to transform agriculture into a higher value-added kind of sector. And I think that could be one of the missions of India, because I mean, I don't think India wants to become another China. In a sense, the China kind of development model, which has been to develop first this essentially low level, low value added production, manufacturing production at very basic level was working because of that particular phase of world development in which China was growing at more than 10% a year. It's not going to work again, I think. So I think granularity is really perhaps one of the things to look at.
Thank you. Thank you. So that brings Lucio to the questions that Roger Fisher from IFAD is posting on the Q&A. The first one is that given China's manufacturing overcapacity, do you think there is still space for India manufacturing sector to grow, or is this place already taken? And then connected to this, I mean, is questioning if this talking about moving people from resources, labor, out of the agricultural sector, isn't this way of thinking historically leading to patterns of unbalanced development? Who wants to start this?
So just 2 points there, if I may, Sergio. One is that and the idea is not to de-emphasize agriculture. The agricultural sector has a lot of distortions, but what it has done is that it has been the buffer. And there is COVID. People move from the cities to the rural areas. So basically, we have arrived at a situation where the marginal product of labor in agriculture is close to zero. Okay, and a lot can be done. Okay, so that's certainly the case that we can think about. Anyway, let's see if Lucio has something to say.
I think the problem is the same as before. I mean, in a sense, we need to focus on a structural transformation, which does not echo in a simplistic way what has happened to China. First, because India is a very different kind of economy. But second, because the evolution of the world and of demand and supply, and also this multipolarity, essentially commands the choice of a different role for India. So that India should discover its role by essentially developing a different structure. And this different structure not based simply on the transfer of labor, of agricultural labor, sort of a naive Lewis model. It should be a more complex and nuanced kind of structure, which valorizes, in a sense, also the present dependence on agriculture, where there is, by the data that Partha was quoting at the beginning, there is a lot of room for productivity increase, which means also diversification, development, and integration with agro-industries and other kind of manufacturers.
Yeah, thank you. I think that both of you have avoided to talk directly on the comparison between India and China. Would you like to say anything on this?
Yeah. So I just want to say 2 things. One is that if you look at where China was at the end of the Cultural Revolution, politically a complete mess, but in terms of their education and health parameters, the rural areas were fine. I mean, I've not been into rural areas too much, but if you look at even critical films about the Cultural Revolution, in the rural areas, and they are not towing the party line at all. And the parameters, all the Chinese economists I know, and most of them come from rural backgrounds, they were waiting for Deng Xiaoping to say that let's have the university entrance exams. Okay, so they were prepared for university. If you did a similar thing in India, it would just give rents to people who are already educated. It's not the bulk of the population is completely uneducated. Similarly, health-wise, the stunting and the wasting statistics I quoted, they are not able to do anything because their health parameters are very poor. That's the first thing. The second thing is that I just don't want to I do want to emphasize the fact that China has stolen. I don't. It's not accusatory. China has taken away a lot of very cheap labor-intensive goods production from India. So there could be some import substitution which would bring that back to India. So whether we can be the powerhouse of low scale manufacture for the world, I'm not suggesting that. I'm simply saying that if you look at the trade balance, there's a lot of scope to make up.
Yeah, Lucio, please. We have another question. Then you want to say something, Lucio, on this?
Just want to say this polarization between low educated and educated is characteristics of many countries, even in the US. I mean, to some extent, you have that there is a lot of rural part of the US where education is very low, and then there is also the eastern state, essentially the urbanized states where education is very high. This polarization, it's very bad also from a political point of view. And of course, it can be an albatross at the neck of the country. So it is an important, I think, an important consideration. I agree with Partha. And nonetheless, I don't think that it compromises, the final conclusion that a different path of diversification and structural growth should be sought.
Yeah, thank you. Yes, we have another question from Mayur Kamble, if I pronounce it correctly. How does India need to work on institutional quality in terms of service delivery, especially in the health and education sectors? What are partner views on this? Mayur is a PhD student at CDS 3 Vanguard.
No, absolutely. That we need a much better form of governance. If we are talking about the government spending more on primary health and education, or even later, the secondary education, tertiary education, then the quality of delivery is very important, and it is probably true that India is not at all good along those dimensions, and that's probably true of China also. I don't think if you talk to any Chinese person who was around at the time of COVID, forget where COVID originated and all that, but how they actually tackled COVID was abysmal. People were running away from wherever there was one person who was diagnosed with COVID. So the quality of delivery is very important. So we need institutions. And I think that is probably where I think we are increasingly failing. Because I think that, in 30 years ago, when I came back to India, someone like me could have thought about going into politics. I'm not talking, could have. But today, I wouldn't even think about it for someone because I think it has become much more of a mafiosi.
All right, so we are at the end. Just 30-second final remarks. First, Lucio, please.
No, I just on this. I think this is an important point because there is a clear trade-off in human capital formation between quantity and quality of education. But education is and capital formation, one of those things that I was mentioning before, which to some extent is endogenously driven. See, it's driven by the local culture. And in Eastern Asia, for instance, there is a local culture based on meritocracy and a long experience. But this also in Protestant countries, against Catholic ones, this endogenous formation of human capital is the key driver of a better education. Of course, institutions are important, but it's important also to recognize that you can waste a lot of money by essentially constructing educational programs that do not work or very low quality. And unfortunately, this is one of the main observations on some of the programs in India.
Yeah, thank you. So, Partha, your final remarks.
Yes, one of the just a couple of things which we didn't touch upon are things like the remnants of caste and religion, which has now become much more important. And so education, income distribution. But in India, there is still a lot of discrimination. So, I watched a film called The Tree of the Wooden Clogs, Hermano Olmi. And yes. So, I mean, that is true of India based on social status. That if you are a low caste person, what you do can be held against you. Now, increasingly, Islamophobia has also become somewhat acceptable. So therefore, that's also a problem. So, the social cohesion, instead of becoming the society becoming more cohesive, in some sense, we are moving in the opposite direction. And that has a bearing on, the delivery of services.
Thank you. Okay, good. Well, I thank you so much. We were perfectly on time, a lot of issues, a lively discussion. So thank you again to Partha and Lucio for the excellent performance, and to all of the participants and the very interesting questions. So stay tuned. We try to keep the pace of one webinar at least per month. So I hope to see you again in March. And for today, this is it. Thank you again.